Hi there, Prairie Plant Girl here. This morning I'm out in my garden and I'm going to be planting some cucumbers and some nasturtiums. So I've set up this trellis. I think this is called the Titan squash tunnel is actually what it is. So it goes up over my head and connects to the bed beside me here. This is what I grew my watermelon and cantaloupe on last year, and it worked really well for me. It was very sturdy. This year I have different plans for growing my melons, and so I thought I would put this tunnel to use here in my garden. So you're standing kind of in the entrance to my garden right beside my shed, and this is the look in. There'll be this tunnel going over top connecting these two beds, and I thought I would have cucumbers growing up. And I decided, since I like to add a few flowers to my yard, that I would put a few nasturtiums in this area as well. I think that'll look nice. So right directly behind this tunnel here on this side, I have a row of potatoes and then a few rows of peas. And down on this end here, I have a little bit of kohlrabi, though the flea beetles are doing their best to beat me to that kohlrabi. I'm not sure it's going to amount to much. And directly in front of me, I have a little bit of lettuce planted. So the cucumbers will go here and they'll grow up, and that just gives me space for the cucumbers in this bed that I wouldn't otherwise have if they were sprawling across on the ground. So I have, I think it's 6 varieties of cucumbers here. I have Corentine. So Corentine is supposed to be an earlier producer, and it is supposed to also be a heavier producer, giving you great 4 to 5 inch pickling cucumbers. These are supposed to have very short spines on them, and they are supposed to mature in 45 days. So that's a great cucumber. I've grown them before. I really like them. I have Armenian, which technically I believe is a melon, but people grow it and eat it like a cucumber. And I am planning to put it actually on the other side of the trellis in the next bed, which also has some potatoes and spinach in it. So this one will be going across the way, and it gets very long, kind of pale green, yellow cucumber type melons on it. I tried this last year for the first time. I didn't actually get any production, but it was kind of tucked back in the corner. I just don't think it was getting enough light to produce well for me. So I'm gonna put it out in a better area and hopefully have better success this year. This is the Parisian gherkin. This should be ready in about 60 days, and this is just a small gherkin style cucumber. I've grown it for a couple of years now. It works out pretty well for me, so it goes in again this year. This is the Babylon cucumber. This is a hybrid cucumber. It's mature in about 50 to 60 days, and this is a very smooth skin, straight, I think it's usually about 5 inches to 6 inches long cucumber. I do use it for pickling, but it's also good as just a nice fresh eating cucumber as well. And then I have National Pickling. So this one is also supposed to be ready in about 58 days, and this is just kind of your standard pickling cucumber. If you grow it on a trellis like this, then it'll hang down and be nice straight cucumbers, whereas if you grow it on the ground, they can get a little bit curved. Doesn't really matter as far as flavor goes. It just can make it easier to pack in the jars if they're straight. And I grew this for first time, I think, last year. It worked out fairly well for me, but I think I can get better production if I have it, just with a little less crowding and a little more space. So I think I'll actually put this one across the way with the Armenian. So I'll have these two kind of somewhat larger cucumber plants on the other side, and then the rest down this side. And then I'm just going to intersperse a few nasturtiums between them. I have a few climbers and a few kind of more bushy nasturtiums, and I think those will look nice in between. So I guess that gives me 5 varieties of cucumbers that I'll be growing. One's technically a melon, but we're going to call it a cucumber for these purposes. So being that they produce so much fruit in such a very short amount of time, they're just very heavy producing plants. Cucumbers need a lot of good rich soil, so I'm just putting down a row of fertilizer along the space that I'm going to be planting. I'm just using this Pro Mix tomatoes, vegetables and fruits. This will be a good fertilizer for the cucumbers. and it'll help them to get off to a good start and produce well with lots of good heavy nutrition. This soil does have quite a bit in it with compost and that I add every year, but this just makes sure that this space right where their roots are is going to be full of good nutrition, that the microbes and things can get into the soil and up into the roots of the plants as they grow. So I'm going to put a little bit of that down, work it into the soil a little bit, and then get planting. So then I can just kind of work it in. Now you can start cucumbers early indoors to plant out, and oftentimes I do that, but this year I decided to go with just planting them right in place. It doesn't really matter other than you may get your cucumbers a bit earlier with started plants, but sometimes they shock too when you put them in the ground. You know, sometimes they don't like to be disturbed a lot, so you run that risk. So cucumber seeds look like that. And they just want to be about 1/2 inch to 1 inch deep and about 6 inches apart. So I usually just kind of push them down to about the first knuckle of my finger, and then I space them about this far apart. I usually put about 2 per hole, 2 seeds per hole, and that works well. And I don't find you have to prune them back once they've germinated to one plant, but you can if you want. But when you're growing them up like this, they'll be fine to grow a couple together. So I made little tags so I know which variety is which. Usually you can kind of tell as the fruit starts to form, but until then sometimes it's hard to know. And in most gardens it wouldn't really matter, but when I'm trying to do videos and show you the different cucumbers, I like to know what I'm talking about with the varieties. So. And that's just how easy it is to plant them. So I'm going to get the rest planted, and then we'll get some nasturtiums put in as well. Okay, so I have all the cucumbers planted, and now I have, like I said, some nasturtiums that I want to plant. So I have the variety Rumba, which is just kind of a lower growing nasturtium. And then I have these tall climbing nasturtiums. So these climbers get to be about 6 feet, it says. And the Rumba, I can't remember, what is it? 10 to 12 inch. But I find they fill in like about as tall as they are wide. So I'm just going to put one Rumba, I think, down at one end of the trellis, and then another at the other end. And then I'm just going to put, I think, probably like 2 of the tall climbers on each half of this trellis. You can see there's like a center post here, so I'll put 2 between the end post and center post, and then 2 at the other side there. And I've never grown nasturtiums or any other climbing plant right on the same trellis with my cucumbers before, but I wanted to give it a try. I saw somewhere, it's supposed to be some sort of, I don't know, pest deterrent or something, some sort of companion planting. And I don't really know what I don't remember what that was about. That's not the point, but I did think, those 2 plants would look nice together. And I thought that might be a nice thing for in the garden. I always like to have flowers in here anyways, so I thought I'd give it a try. So I'm just gonna pop a couple seeds in the ground here in these couple of spots, and then my planting in this area will be done. So that's the nasturtium seeds there. So I'll do the same thing in both beds that I planted cucumbers in, so on this side of the trellis and then the one that's actually kind of behind you right now. So the seeds want to be planted pretty much the same as cucumber seeds, and I'm going to put 3 down in a spot there. They may wind up crowding out my kohlrabi here, but it's not looking that good with the flea beetle action anyways. They might actually attract some flea beetles. We'll see if they survive this planting here. I'm just going to do a couple on the other side, and then we'll do the tall climbers. There's a potato coming up here from my early planting of sangre potatoes. That was the perfect amount of seeds in that one package. So that's great. I like when that happens. So, like I said, I'm just going to do a couple of plantings. And I think I'll kind of go in just slightly behind where I put the cucumbers. Just kind of spread them out a bit. And again, I'll just put a couple of seeds down in each spot. There's a worm come out, hang out with us today. There you go. Do a couple more on this side. I love nasturtiums, but they don't always work well here with all the flea beetles and that we have. They can really be eaten down by the flea beetles. But that's probably not a bad thing to have in my garden. Maybe it'll collect some of the flea beetle pressure from other plants that I'd rather have for food crops. But when they do survive, they look amazing. I find sometimes the nasturtiums can collect up a lot of flea beetles on them, and then they start to look pretty rough kind of midsummer, and I'll just cut them down really low, not quite to the ground, but really, really low, maybe leaving just a little bit. I'll actually throw that away because it's usually so covered in flea beetles. And then once the weather starts to kind of cool down from the super heat of the summer, they tend to come back, and I get a new flush of nasturtiums again to finish out the season. So that's something I really like about them, is they attract some of those pests, but then they also add some beauty to my garden. Purple martins above me. That's a great thing. Speaking of pest deterrents, they'll eat a lot of mosquitoes out here if they decide to nest here. So when you're growing cucumbers, they really like a lot of water. So you need to make sure that they're always getting lots of water. And there's a drip line on this side of the trellis and one just right about the same distance right behind. So these will be getting a lot of water on my drip system throughout the summer. And sometimes with my cucumbers, I actually come in and supplement the watering over the row of cucumbers as well, about once a week, just to make sure they're getting a really good, deep, thorough soaking about once a week. So otherwise, they just want a lot of sun and a lot of heat. They can take a long time to kind of get started. They're like melons and squash that sometimes they'll seem like they germinate, they sprout up, and then they just kind of sit for a long time. But as soon as they get that one big leaf on them, they'll just take off for you. And I'll just train them up the trellis here and until they kind of get a hold, and then they should just take off and climb up. I've never grown them on such a tall trellis before, but I don't think they'll actually cover the top of the trellis, but they should get a good ways up. So I'm excited to see how this little experiment works out this year. I hopefully have picked the right plants to put around it so that the trellis and the cucumbers aren't blocking too much of the light from the other plants on the other side there, because this is west over there and east on that side of the trellis, but the south sun should shine through here. I think we should be all right with that. But I'm really excited to see how this goes anyways. So thanks for hanging out with me in my garden this morning, planting a few cucumbers and nasturtiums, and we'll see you in the next one. Bye.